Like Raya said, my name is Kelly Bell. I'm just so thankful to be here and that she and the school and Suzanne invited me to come and to share with you on stress in kids. How old, before we go, to how, like elementary school age parents? Will you raise your hand? This is mostly middle school. How about middle school? Okay. Wait, yay, middle school. How about high school? Okay, great. Okay, that's fantastic. So I grew up, just a little about me, I grew up in Tarpon Springs, so this is still home turf and home area for me. I went to Florida State and graduated with a degree in elementary education. My husband and I moved back to the area in 2009 and started Trinity New Life Church, where I've worked kind of every job you can work there. That's just what you do when you're starting a church. You just do whatever needs to be done. We have a daughter, Caroline. She's 15. She's a sophomore at Mitchell High School, and I have worked at First Christian Academy as a kindergarten teacher, an assistant, and I'm substitute teaching there now. So I love school. I love education, and I love kids, and so I'm excited to be here and to talk with you today about stress and kids, because even if I asked kind of what age your kids are when I was first writing this, and if you hear some statistics I'm sharing, it's a little bit more about teens and stress. But I think as we're seeing each and every year, surveys are showing this even starts to range with younger kids. So even saying teens, I think probably really in that 5th, 6th grade, you're probably seeing evidence of this already. And so we want to be parents that can help alleviate stress for our kids, teach through it, and provide practical ways for them to process it before it gets out of control. I mean, we will never be able to provide stress-free lives for our kids, nor do I think that's the goal, because that's just not life in general. And so if we're trying to buffer them from every stressful challenge that comes in their life, we're really setting them up for failure for future life experiences. And so we're going to talk today about being a non-anxious presence in their life. But let's first set the stage for what life is like for kids today. Here are just some statistics and things I found doing some research online. This is from the University of Rochester, and a professor in psychology said, adolescents today are more stressed than ever, exhibiting record levels of stress-related internalizing symptoms such as anxiety and depression. And I think that statistic and quote was even in 2019. So think about since COVID and pandemic and school changes there, that has had to have gone up higher. The American Psychology Association also says that since 2013, teens have reported higher levels of stress than adults. So if you think about the stress level even in your own life, think about your kids and your teens, and they're reporting they feel as much stress, if not more, than we do as adults. So you might be asking, what does a typical teen feel stressful about? These were answers that were given from teenagers. The future of the country, stating the U.S. is on the wrong path. Gun violence, mass shootings, school shootings. Societal issues such as suicide rates, climate change, immigration and deportation issues, sexual harassment and assault. They're worried about work, the future, money, and health, alongside the more typical things you might think about of bullying, peer conflict, and then things like that at school. And when I read this list, you might be thinking the same thing, like, I was not aware of anything really going on in the world outside of my local context as a teenager, but I think it's something to remember that teens are not living in the same world or have access to the same things that we did with a smartphone in their hand, with a 24-hour news cycle. They are just inundated with more of what is going on in the world in their life. And so it simply is harder to be a kid nowadays. We want to say like, oh, a kid, it's the same thing. It really isn't. There are different challenges that they are facing today. And stress in adolescence can make for a perfect storm. Until recently, scientists believed that an individual's baseline for stress reactivity was more or less set in the first 2 years of life. I thought that was fascinating. From up to age 2, it was set how a child would respond to stress. But new research suggests that puberty might open that window of sensitivity again for a second chance at recalibrating their stress system. And that could be for better or worse, really depending on the context of what their life is like. If the environment is supportive in adolescence, this second opportunity, it really might smooth out earlier problems or improve coping in the long run. However, if the context is harsh and stressful without relief or repair, it can remodel vulnerability and set them up for harder mental challenges in the future. And so when I read this, I just kept thinking like, man, this is good news. Like, we have as parents another opportunity. If you think, man, 0 to 2 years, that's not a lot of time. But in adolescence, we have another opportunity to create an environment in our home and within our relationship with our kids to model and teach them how to walk through stressful situations in life without affecting them too deeply. From that same article from the University of Rochester, the professor said conventional thinking often equates stress with something bad. Like, I'm stressed about this, this is a bad feeling to have. And really, he says stress is a normal and even defining feature of adolescence. It allows teens to acquire a wide variety of complicated social and intellectual skills as they transition to adulthood. And so we as parents also get a chance when our kids say, I think sometimes kids say words sometimes, like, I'm so stressed about this. Like, do you know what stress means? Like, talk to them. Like, what do you think that means when you're saying you're stressed about it? But also reframe it and say, you're concerned? Okay, that's because this is an important thing. Let's talk about it, and let's talk how we work through it. And don't make I'm stressed equals exactly bad. Stress does not have to equal bad. Because again, our job is to not remove stress-inducing activities or circumstances. They are going to have a big test. They're going to have a big exam. They're going to have a big game where maybe a lot is riding on them. And we don't want to make it so easy that they never learn how to work through stress and how to be resilient. So what is a non-anxious presence? Let's talk about that a little bit more. The future no longer looks as predictable to our kids as it once did. There are reasons upon reasons for them to feel anxious just about tomorrow. If their social reputation at school, a test, maybe they had a homework assignment they didn't finish or think they did well on, there's an important sports game. But they're also more stressed, I think, about future years. And I feel like when I was younger, maybe you as well, I was just thinking about tomorrow or the end of the week. Nowadays, it seems kids are like, if I don't choose my right class, then I'm not going to get in the right program, and then it just can go on and on. I've seen that lived out in my own home. Very shocked by the spiral that can happen in my child. And we live in a time where we are more connected than ever, technologically, not really face-to-face. However, that can backfire in a way because that connection can cause anxiety to go viral. Not just funny memes and videos that we want to send around and go viral, but there can be anxiety that goes viral in a sense. There's a feeling and a heaviness, a weightiness in the air, and you can't always ascribe to one thing. You know that feeling when you're like, I don't know why I'm worried, I'm just worried. I think our kids feel that as well. But when you feel that way, it causes you to be more reactive, less contemplative, and to usually jump to the worst case scenarios. And so the term a non-anxious presence is widely attributed to Edwin H. Friedman from his book called A Failure of Nerve, if that's something you're interested in. A Failure of Nerve is the book. And he wrote that the function of a leader within any institution is to provide regulation through his or her non-anxious, self-defined presence. I'll say that again, because you in this, he's talking about leadership in institutions. You are the leader in the institution of your home. So think of it that way. You are the leader in your family. So the function of a leader, the function of a parent within your home, within your family, is to provide regulation, helping to regulate emotions through your own non-anxious and self-defined presence. You may have heard this phrase tossed around, a non-anxious presence. It's becoming more and more popular in counseling and in mental health conversations. And this phrase doesn't mean your presence always removes or absorbs anxiety from the situation. But what it does mean is that you don't react anxiously to what your kids are going through. It means you have a self-defined reaction, not a circumstance-defined reaction. You don't go up and down as their own circumstances go up and down. Because in anxious environments, which I think we've established our teens and our kids are in quite often, parents can serve their child best by being a non-anxious presence. Have you ever been in a room where the fire alarm or something loud like went off. I substitute, I think I said at First Christian Academy, and twice this year, I don't know how, I'm like, are you scheduling fire drills when I am here, like with kindergarten? You know, it was like their first fire drill, and they all just freeze and look at me. And in their frantic emotions and behavior, if I yelled out an alarm and if I said, oh my gosh, what are we doing? They would panic. They all stop and they're looking at me to give not just only comfort, but to give a controlled answer, to give clear directions, and to be that non-anxious presence for them in that time. And I say like they want someone in control, but we all know we cannot control all of life's circumstances. That's just a matter of fact. We all have lived long enough to know we cannot control what life always brings. But what we can control is how we respond and how we react to that. And our kids are watching to see how we are doing that. And so as much as we want to talk about how do we help monitor and regulate this in our kids, we have to do it first in our own life, because that is what they're going to see. So let's talk about how our non-anxious presence can help our kids go through the expected and the unexpected challenges of adolescence. Because as a parent, there's no doubt that when your kid's stress level rises, yours wants to naturally rise right along with it. I heard one time on a podcast for parenting, they were talking about teen anxiety. And it was saying, we cannot as parents relive our own teen fears, our own teen anxieties with our kids. Like our body, our minds have already done that. It's like, I'm not calling it trauma because I think we overuse that word, but like we've lived that experience once as a teenager. And so when our kids are going through this, we can't physically put ourselves or mentally put ourselves right back there. That's not healthy for us. We can offer sympathy and teaching, a comforting ear, and a non-anxious presence, but let their journey be their journey and be there for them and be supportive in it. So how are we this non-anxious presence without being thrown into a spiral with them ourselves? Well, first, if you don't always react to your kids' anxiety, they're gonna know you're a safe place and that you bring calm and regulation to their concerns. I have, unfortunately, a very strong example from like last week. So my daughter, she came home, we're in Caroline, I picked her up and she's like, oh, my guidance counselor came in today and he's giving us all these papers and saying if we have not, talking about the Bright Future Scholarship, talking about college applications, what courses they need to take for graduation. And she goes, he said if we did not submit this form earlier last year, none of our hours count. And in my head, I'm like, you've done a lot of volunteer hours for this to not count. Like if you were banking on Bright Futures, we were banking on Bright Future Scholarship for our daughter going into college. And they need 100 hours of volunteer hours. And she's a type A, on it, great student, but she's a worrier as well. And I know where she gets it from, right here, right here. So in my head, I want to be like, well, that's not fair. How can they say that to you? You've worked so hard. And I just stopped. And I took a deep breath and I said, okay, we're gonna figure this out. That's all, you know what I mean? Because obviously it is a stressful situation. I'm not gonna say it's not a big deal. I've done that in the past and I've learned when we don't validate our kids' feelings, they don't trust us with their feelings. And so the answer right there was not to say it's not a big deal. But I had to leave. I went out for an hour. I came back home. And I could tell, like, she was not the same. Like, she had been home alone for an hour, and her thoughts, I could tell, just went unedited, uncomforted, and I was like, hey, I can tell there's something going on. Like, what's going on? And we've been this for a long time, and she's 15, that she's pretty self-aware of her emotions and how to communicate them. I'm very thankful for that. And so when I asked her, she just quickly told me, and my husband was out of town. It's always how it is. If you have a spouse that travels, it was way out of town, out of the country. So when I asked her what was going on, she just like, I couldn't stop thinking about college and how am I going to get in? Because the reality is, like, it is harder to get into college. She came home with the statistics. I was like, I don't know if I would have gotten into FSU with what is required of kids now. And so she's sharing to me what is going on. And honestly, my response in the past would have sounded something like this. you're taking this too seriously. It's not a big deal. You're a great student. This is not something at your age you need to worry about, because this is something she talked about in middle school, not just high school. This is where I'm thinking it's getting younger and younger that kids are thinking about the future. And in doing that, if I would have just said, it's not a big deal, why are you worrying? I would have dismissed her feelings. I would have closed a door and an opportunity to come in and provide my non-anxious presence to her worried heart in that time. So because of experience, I knew that one of the worst things I can do was invalidate and tell her her emotions weren't real, they weren't worth it, she shouldn't feel that way. Because even if I wouldn't have felt the same way, maybe you wouldn't have processed it the same way, like to you it really wouldn't have been a big deal. They are their own person. They have their own feelings about things. And they might get stressed out and worried about things that aren't as big of a deal to you, but it is to them. And so it's important to know our child and to know what are the things they care deeply about. How can we give them a healthy care and not one that's going to drag them down to become really deep anxiety or deep depression, and something that can lead to something more serious. So I listened to her. I asked her if she wanted me to share, because kids don't always want you to talk to them about their problems. They just want to say them out loud and just get it off their chest. So I said, can I share what I think? And she said yes, which is always great. She could have said no, and you have to take that, like, especially as they get older. Like, I'm hoping that through our years together, she is learning how to process. And so at that time, she was not ready to have my opinion. I had to respect that, back away and say, when you want to talk about it, I'm here. So she said yes. My watch is caught up, sorry. So she said yes, share. And I like I said, like, I didn't deny, I validated her feelings. Like, you're right. This is something I would have been upset about, and I would have been really stressed as well at your age if I would have done all this work and there's a chance that someone's saying, it doesn't matter. We're not going to accept that. And I get how hard it is to get into school right now. But because we believe in something, I have a faith in something and a belief in something greater than myself. I know that school is not the be-all, end-all of her future. I was able to just to offer a different perspective of, if you don't get into that one college, do you think that's going to derail your whole future? Like, we could just ask questions and really have her think about it. Like, well, no, like, do you know how many colleges there are here in Florida and different places that you could have a really great time and experience? So just asking her questions, letting her think of a different possibility and a different future. I was able to bring a non-anxious presence to her very anxious heart at that time. And is she probably still thinking about that meeting with the guidance counselor? Probably, because she's got some things to do. She has questions. She's got a plan. She has to find out what to do from here. But I'm hoping that in that time, I was able to help put a proper perspective. Has your child ever come home from school with a grade they thought was unfair? We've done that before. I felt, especially in middle school, emotions were definitely a little higher, I think, and especially with girls, in that like 10 to 12, those are some years if you're a mom to a daughter of 10 to 12. It gets better. I love being a mom to a teen, just so you know. A lot of times parents are like, but the teen years, like, we have so much fun together. She is becoming, I'm still her parent, but she's becoming more of my friend, and it's a really fun time. So don't be afraid of the teen years, especially if you foster these years, younger years with them well. So she has come before in the car line and said, Mrs. So-and-so, she wouldn't even let me ask her. As soon as you start hearing things about that, I'm reminded when I was teaching and I would put a slide up that said, I'll believe half of what I hear about at home if you believe half of what you hear about in the classroom, because kids have a very narrow perspective sometimes. Like, I'm sure your teacher didn't silence you. Maybe it just was not the time to ask a question. But what's interesting about being a non-anxious presence is that, did you know your non-anxious presence can actually cause more stress at first in your kids, because they want you to match their anger. They're like, can you even believe it? And they want you to say, how dare her? How dare that teacher give you that grade or not listen? And when you don't, when you can bring calm and peace, they're going to be maybe more upset at first. In these circumstances, you need to do everything you can to keep your nerve to keep your self-defined reaction, what we talked about, not circumstance-defined, and provide a next step plan that your child can be a part of. A lot of times, whatever is causing them stress, it has to be worked out. And if you do it all for them, they're not learning that resiliency. They're not learning how to address their problems. And so, depending on being age appropriate, hold their hand through some of it. Have them do a little bit, you do a little bit. By the time in high school, I have very much said, you need to go and set an appointment with your guidance counselor. And if that doesn't work, I'm here. How can you walk them through it, but really let them take the lead depending on their age? How about this instance? I think friendships and relationships can cause a lot of stress in our kids. If your child has a falling out with a friend, what is your response? Do you say, yeah, she wasn't a good friend anyways? I would not do that, because good chance they're going to be besties tomorrow, and then they all is forgotten. And so if you just already said something bad about that friend, well, then they're going to remember that. So don't say that. But do you have an experience you can share about a friendship, a time in your life that you had a falling out with a friend? I think when our kids see they're not the only ones, we all think, even as adults, no one understands. I'm the only one that has a kid that is responding this way. And 100%, that's not true. That is not true. We all have challenges. They might look different. We all have gone through things as a child, as a teen, as married, a parent, whatever it is. We're not alone in the experiences we're going through. So if we can already take that moment and express to our kids, you're not alone in this. This happened to me. Let me tell you about it. There's something so relatable and reassuring to our kids in that moment, that no, not everything is going to work out the way you thought it would, but sometimes it works out even better. Or there's a path that opens up that you wouldn't even have known if this thing that seemed bad at the time wouldn't have happened. And so that's another way we're providing a non-anxious presence for our kids in that moment. And one of the articles I was reading, it said one of the biggest things we can do as parents is to model stress management. I talked about this a little bit earlier. If we ourselves know that we struggle with stress, we struggle with our reactions to hard things in life, our kids are going to be very much aware of that, especially if we're verbal about our reactions. If we hear something and they hear how we respond, we're modeling that behavior for them. And so how can you yourself learn to process stressful circumstances better in your life? Like, our kids are watching, and be open if you know, like, man, I need more tools for myself or tools for my child. Like, counseling is a beautiful option, and it's a great option. It is something that can help give you practical tools on how to process pain and unexpected news, whatever it is that might cause you stress. As we wrap up, here are just some other ways to help kids with stress that might not be specifically bringing that non-anxious presence into their life. I think something so wonderful, and maybe even as your kids get older, you'll be able to do this more, is to have mentors that are not you. As your kids grow up, they want to hear from other people, and there's going to be a time they're going to listen better to somebody else. And that doesn't mean they don't trust you or love you. It just means that's the season of life that they're in. I can say something that another maybe young adult can say to my daughter, and she comes home and says, well, so-and-so said this. And I'm like, did they? I'm so glad they thought of that. I never have said anything like that before. But instead of saying that and making her not want to share, I'm just like, wow, I'm so glad you had that conversation with her. So encourage mentors in your child's life, whether it's teachers or coaches. If you're at church, there are leaders there that either help with your kids in the back or at your youth group. Like, find places that your kids can have other people that you trust. Make it a trustworthy source, right? That can speak into your child's life. Another way to help alleviate stress, these are just very practical ones here: sleep, nutrition, and exercise. We undervalue these things in our own lives, and we need to start these good habits in the life of our kids. Teens are shortchanged, I read this, teens are shortchanged by an average of 2 hours of sleep per night, which adds up to a devastating deficit. That's a lot of hours to add up. And you might not think it's just this one night, they went to bed late. But if you can start good bedtime habits and routines from an early age, that is going to carry with them and really help them in high school and in college to be able to focus on what they're doing and to process. Man, we know when you're tired, you do not handle stressful things. That just adds a whole nother layer of stress when you are tired and cranky. Some other things to help your child or your teen is volunteering. Is there a place they can go and volunteer and take the focus off of themselves? I think when I'm thinking of somebody else, my problems are in just a little bit not as bad as maybe as what I thought that they were to begin with. So have them volunteer with them, or if you volunteer, bring them along and be a part of that. Build emotional intelligence in your kids. What that means, teaching them to be aware of their emotions and learn strategies to regulate. How do you regulate? That was a hard thing with my daughter. She definitely leaned more towards anxiety. And my husband and I did what we could from books we read and people we've talked to help teach her how to regulate, like anxiety attacks or things, but there were things that were just beyond our own abilities. And so we took her to a counselor, and that was the best thing we could have done for her. And now looking back, we can reference, well, okay, when you have this kind of thought, what did Sarah say? Not what did we say? Like, what did the professional, how did she tell you how to handle this and how to come down from it? So don't shy away from that. It doesn't have to be a last resort either, counseling. It can be very beneficial for you and your child. Church religious groups, I think, offer great ways to help kids with stress to be around their peers in a safe environment. And lastly, give your child a chance to have a healthy challenge. Like, everything should not be easy in life. And that's hard. I don't know if that's more hard for moms. I don't know, I'm not a dad. But I think moms, we want to be like, don't hurt my kid in that way. Like, that mama bear, anger wants to rise up. But if we insulate them from every hardship in their life, they're never going to know how to deal with it when they're outside of your home. So while they're with you in the safety, in the protection, in the love and comfort of your home, teach them how to go through hard times and build resiliency for the future. And here's some good news. I'm going to leave you with good news. 79% of teens feel they can share honest questions, struggles, and doubts with their parents. Isn't that great? Like, this is not like, oh, these are just kids at church that were, because I know, like, clearly I have a church background. This was all of teens. 79% of teens feel they can share honestly with their parents. But 70% of teens also say older generations do not understand the pressure they are under. So they want to share with us. The doors are open. But if we come in right away and say, you shouldn't feel that way, it's not that big of a deal, why is this so hard, then we're just going to shut that door right down where their hearts are open and wanting to come to us. They're going to find so many other places in life that are going to not be safe, not be comforting, not be reassuring, and non-anxious presence. And so that is what we can offer as their parents. And it is hard work. It's hard to be a place of peace all the time, because if our hearts are not at peace, it's hard to always be that for our kids. And I say it's hard work because if you're thinking, man, this doesn't come naturally, I feel bad, like don't. It takes practice. Like I said, it took years. Like, I asked Caroline, that's my daughter's name, I asked her the other day, if there's one thing that I'm sharing with parents, like, what's one thing that you wish I did better, or you wish Daddy did better, and she's like, I can't think of anything, their first answer. I go, fine. 2 days later, she goes, is it too late for me to share? I go, no, come on, like, you've been thinking about it, huh? And she goes, I'm not saying that you do this. I go, oh, I probably do. Like, I'm very much aware, I'm not perfect. And she said what I already had in my notes. She goes, it's when, like, people say, that's not a big deal. And that's it. Like, they just want to know their cares and concerns are real, that their feelings are valid. They want you to sympathize and just say, yeah, I'm sorry you had a hard day with that. But just because I can sympathize does not mean I met her in her emotions. I saw her in her emotions, and I'm helping to give her a way to regulate and a way out, a way through them. So It is hard work, but it's good work and it's eternal work. The work you're doing as parents is going to last a lifetime in their life. And so, and if you get it wrong, that's okay. You'll have many opportunities to practice and get it right tomorrow and the next week and the next week. So there is hope for us. You can grow right along with your kids as we do this together. So thank you guys. Thank you so much for having me today.